Thank you everyone today for taking a little bit of time out of your busy schedules. We've got about 30 minutes of content to go through, and we're going to talk about vendor trust, really what it means to manage your third-party risk, some recommendations, the approaches, understanding who your key stakeholders are, and overall pulling that program together in the way that aligns with your own company's security objectives, and a way to measure it and make it a little bit more efficient, hopefully. So as we go through today's session, we'll be talking a little bit about real-world examples, and hopefully there's a little takeaway. If you have any questions during the session, please drop them into the chat. Kevin will collect those, and at the end we can address any remaining questions that anyone has. But let's go ahead and get started here. Again, for those who I have not had the chance to meet in person before, there's a not so flattering picture of me. I think Kevin did a pretty good introduction of laying out who I am, so I won't go into this in much more detail, other than I do a lot of these speaking events, not only within the Tevora webinar series, but also in other conferences and forums. Like any professional that's been in the field for quite some time, a lot of certifications and so forth. But I do try to make these sessions a little bit personal, so I'll share a little bit of a personal note here today. I live in Virginia, and we grow our own tomatoes, and today for lunch I had my very first homegrown tomato sandwich with a little bit of bacon and provolone. It was very good. So there's a personal touch about who I am, what I like. So anyway, but you're not here to learn about me, and you're not here really to learn, but you are here to learn a little bit more about Tevora and our capabilities. Kevin had mentioned we do have compliance services, PCI, SOC, HIPAA, ISO, high trust. We are very excited to announce that in the compliance space, we're going to be a 3PAO on the FedRAMP front here. In the next 3 weeks, we should be showing up on the FedRAMP marketplace, so a little bit of a breaking news in that space. You'll see a lot more activity as that is finalized, but we're very excited that we've passed the final audit on that. In our enterprise risk space, all the compliance frameworks require us to conduct various risk assessments, and so we support our clients in that space, as well as if they need to build out their risk program, maybe they need some policies, put together some management strategies on how to manage your risks, costs, ROIs. So we definitely do that. As Kevin mentioned, I think we're headquartered in Irvine, California, and so we certainly speak CCPA. So for those data privacy needs, those are things that we can touch on. We also have a lot of experience in the GDPR space. So if you have any data privacy questions, we can certainly, our team can satisfy and meet those questions. Security solutions, we have over 200 vendors that we partner with, so getting the right kind of solutions out there for you. Our threat management team, one of the best in the business, constantly identifying zero-day vulnerabilities out there. Our researchers are certainly been published with those. So we do our pen tests, our web applications tests, mobile tests, API testing is very common, so the red teaming, purple teaming, all that activity. But we also have a research arm there. So I'd like to give a shout out to Truman and Kevin and the whole team over there. They actually took a Tesla, they turned it into a surveillance vehicle. They took the camera systems and were able to track not only license plates, but facial recognition from those. And so they were, it was such an exciting thing. They were featured in Wired magazine. The FBI actually came and asked if they could use their technology as part of their own training. So really great site. So it's not just those that pen test, but we have a great research arm that sits behind it, big differentiator for us. And then on the incident response front, we are a PCI forensics investigator. There's about 14 or so that are authorized to operate in North America, and we're one of those 14. So when Visa, MasterCard declare a breach, I need someone to get boots on the ground and figure out what happened. We're the team to go to there. Happy to announce that we do have a Fairfax office that we opened up a little bit earlier this year. So we got offices up in New York City as well, in Manhattan, although I think just about all of us are working remote these days. We've started to open things back up. But so anyway, that's enough about Tevora. You're not here to learn too much more about us, but really get into understanding vendor third-party risk issues. So we're going to talk a little bit to set the stage with some program fundamentals. Then we're going to go talk about how you properly build that program, from aligning security policies to those questionnaires that we've all seen or created ourselves, to the security exhibits that we should put in the contractual requirements. We'll talk a little bit about that. There's a lot of great products out there, and there's different product categories. So we're going to spend just a few moments talking about those products. what those solutions look like, and how they have different purposes and needs. Next, we'll jump into some challenges, and with any program, you can build it right, you can put the things in place, but there's still going to be challenges. So we'll cover some of those challenges with some recommendations on how to deal with each of those challenges, and then we'll open it up for any questions that you have. So let's go ahead and get started here on the program fundamentals. So probably the very first thing to start with is, who are your key stakeholders when you're dealing with a third-party risk program? And it's interesting for those that have been doing it. You got the business partner, the business owner. And I was explaining this to someone. They're like, the business owner, someone who owns the business? I was like, no, the one who owns the relationship with that third party, or who's asking to bring that third party in there. So that internal business partner, if I spend a moment on that, is that person within either operations or security or whomever it is that says, hey, I want to contract with this third party. That's your business partner. That's the one that you're trying to help them bring their solution to bear for the organization. So they're certainly a key stakeholder. Procurement, there's certainly someone there that's going through the process of making sure that you have the POs, and how do you get that in there through whatever process works for your organization. There's going to be a contract in place. So you have to have legal in there. They're going to go through it and make sure all the T's and C's and all that's taken care of to get the MSAs. And certainly the privacy team. Privacy is a foundational component. They've really done a good job. Everything from CCPA to GDPR. They're even within the NIST 853 Rev 5 updates coming out. They're baking privacy into those requirements. So we're going to have to do your privacy impact assessment. So privacy is certainly going to have a play there. The security team that's actually going to conduct the risk assessments and those assessments of those vendors, whatever that looks like for your organization. And then lastly, you've got that vendor point of contact, the person who's actually being subject to your questions and interviews and whatever evaluation processes that you've built for that particular entity. So the program needs to be built with all these key stakeholders in mind. And if you don't take the time to make sure you get everyone aligned, at least those within your organization, the vendor has to live with what you guys push them through. But as far as the business partner, the procurement, legal, privacy, the security team, those all have to work very much in coordination. So when you're endeavoring to take over a program or to manage a program, make sure you've got all those key stakeholders as part of the conversation. So how do you get to know your third parties? Where are your vendors? And so the most logical and easiest way that most companies certainly start with this is accounts payable. Who do we pay? If we pay someone money, then there's someone who they're probably doing something for us, and someone that we should probably have some security controls around. So that's always a good list to start with. The second one is your contracts. Hey, who have you written a contract with? This becomes a little bit more challenging. If you've got a centralized contract database, then great, you've got a place to start with. But a lot of organizations, it's kind of spread out. Maybe different divisions have their own processes in place, maybe separate sites. Maybe it's you got stuff that's done in the US and stuff that's not done in the US. So you've got this dispersed contracting process. But if you can get your hands on those contracts, those are certainly where you want to pull that in to say, okay, those that we have contracts with, and those that we have active contracts with, certainly something to differentiate. Just because I had a contract with them 8 years ago, is the contract still active? Have we actually done anything under the contract? If not, then maybe we don't want to count them as an active third party. So those are the two that I'd say most organizations use for the baseline, and that's absolutely where you should begin. But there's a couple areas that I want to expand upon. Technology insights. So what's interesting here is, if you were to look at your network and your network traffic that's flowing through your firewalls, and you'll say, hey, I see that a lot of data is going to, hey, maybe it's going to Google Cloud. Why am I putting gigabytes of data into Google Cloud? Maybe someone signed up for a free service or a freemium service of some sort, and they're pushing a lot of data from your organization out onto that third party. You're not paying them, it's free. There wasn't a contract because it was a click through that someone did at their, an engineer said, hey, I'm going to try and spin up something and start using it for R&D. All of a sudden you can take a look at where your data is flowing within your organization, what kind of connections your staff is making to outside entities, and to say, hey, are we using, there's definitely lots of tools out there that can help break that apart and say, okay, I see you're sending X amount of data on a daily basis, on a monthly basis to this third party. Hey, if we don't have a contract with them and they're a known entity, we probably should. A lot of times people will sign up and pay for things with their own corporate cards or again, the freemium services. So that's certainly an angle and something to look under the covers a little bit more there. And this last one, it still amazes me. I went to one organization a number of years back, and we went through accounts payable, we went through contracting. We actually had some technology insights. We were seeing where APIs were going back and forth, and said, okay, we think we have and understand the landscape here of the vendors. I said, let's stop. Let's do a survey. Let's actually ask, each of these business leaders across the organization what their key vendors are. And it was amazing. We actually doubled the number of vendors because, again, people are using corporate cards or personal cards and doing expenses. There wasn't a formal contract in place, yet they were a key third party to their organization in many cases. And so have a conversation, establish a conversation with your business partners and say, okay, who do you guys use? And make sure that's included. So that's a good way to get a good understanding of the landscape, those vendors that you're gonna have to deal with. One of the next things, okay, so I got this huge pool of third parties that I'm dealing with. Some of them are really important. Some of them you may be running services up on AWS. Others, they bring you coffee. And yes, coffee is critically important to the operations of most organizations, but the security assessment process for someone that brings you coffee isn't necessarily the same as someone where you're hosting your environment up in a cloud provider. So what I like to start is these are the 5 key questions that every organization should ask. And these are probably the most fundamental questions when you start looking at and creating your third-party vendor program. Does the company hold any of my data? Do we send them anything? Maybe it's they're a processor for us and we send them a credit card, or we're passing a link off of our website for payment processing. Maybe we work in the healthcare industry and they're doing some piece of patient care. Maybe they're part of our infrastructure services. So so what kind of data are you sharing with that particular entity? Do they hold your company data? Do they connect to your network, either through a site-to-site VPN or through maybe a client VPN, something you've issued credentials out to that organization? They have the ability to actually connect into your network. Do they host or develop anything for you? So maybe they host a website somewhere or a service or a module, or they develop some sort of specific software for your organization. If they answer yes to either of those questions, yeah, they're going to certainly move up in that tiering rating. Do they have physical access to your facilities? Okay, now they can come on site. Maybe they can start plugging into network jacks. The level that I need to start to review and look at them is a little bit more. And lastly, can they impact any of your critical business operations? If so, then they're definitely going to start moving in that tier 2, tier 1 category for your organization. So these are 5 questions I really like to start with. Yes, your scoping questionnaires that you have with them in those business security questionnaires, you'll certainly have more, but these are the ones that you just want to have those fundamentally burned into the back of your mind. These are the questions that you should be asking. Oops, let's see. Forward, there you go. Foundational alignments. So every organization should, I guess there's still a few that don't have their information security policies, but you should have a defined baseline of what your security framework is. For that security program, you're now adding a vendor or a third party. They should be an extension of your team. So they should be adopting and aligning to your core foundation of what your information security policy says. So if your risk threshold and your expectations are in one spot, and you should pass those expectations down to those vendors through contracts. So when you write those contracts and there's third-party exhibits or security addendums or whatever they happen to be called as part of the SOWs, every organization calls a little bit differently, but those should be aligned back to the fundamental things that you care most about within your own information security program. Additionally, when you're creating these questionnaires for them to fill out, they should align with what you put in the contract. It is amazing how many times I go to a corporation to help them build out the program, and the information security policy was written in a silo by one group. The contract and legal team was writing the contracts in isolation, and those that are conducting the third-party questionnaires and the actual assessments didn't take the time to harmonize these 3 components. And so they're putting things in contract that they're missing things from the contract that they're asking and expecting the vendor to do on their behalf. So put it in the contract. If you try to do an assessment after the fact and it's not in the contract and the third party says, no, I don't need to do that because it's not in the contract, get in front of that. Go ahead and add that language into the contracts. Likewise, when those information security policies, they should be alignment saying, if you've got XYZ is your policy for incident response, time to be notified, you want to be able to pass it down the contract with clear expectations on when they need to pass that information back up to you. So there's a couple of things in the contract that you absolutely should have. Certainly, there has to be a right to audit clause. You want to make sure that you're giving an opportunity to examine what they're doing on your behalf. You certainly want to make sure they got a strong vulnerability management program in place. You want to make sure that any sort of, and we'll talk about this in the next slide here, compliance flowdowns that you have from your industry. But lastly, that their incident response, that there's clear direction in those contracts, that when an incident happens, not only how long they have, but who to reach out to. I was helping a client review their contract and says, oh yeah, they're required to notify us within 48 hours of any suspected incident. I was like, okay, great. Who do they notify? I don't know. It doesn't say in the contract. They're like, I don't know. We don't actually provide them direction there. So they could just notify their sales rep or their business liaison. No, you want to specifically say, you need to identify and reach out to our SOC or call this phone number, give them clear direction of what needs to be in that contract. But get that foundational alignment of what your security program, what's in that contract, and the security questionnaires that you're asking of your vendors. The next thing is really to come up with a process. What you see up here is a sample process line. What we've done is we've broken it into swim lanes. The business, I said business POC, that's your the person who's bringing the vendor on. Hey, I want to use this new vendor. How does that come into your environment? Maybe then the procurement takes the next step. Are they already working with them? Is there some sort of rating system that's in place? At some point, then there's going to be someone conducting a risk assessment, a vendor assessment of that particular supplier. So what they're going to do is go ahead and reach out to that third party, their POC, to fill out the questionnaire, but put down this process to paper. Once you do this and start understanding where your decision points are, next steps, actions, then you understand who's got the roles and responsibilities, how the process is supposed to work, and then you can start building your program from there. So take the time to document your process. When you get into that process of to the point where you need to start developing your questionnaire, most certainly, if you're in a specific industry like PCI, flow down those PCI requirements if they're touching anything with it. If you're a defense contractor, there is most certainly DFARS requirements that need to be flowed down as well as adherence to NIST 800-171. Certainly the GDPR requirements exist for the various articles that come into play, as well as business associate agreements. So those that are working in the healthcare space. So you need to make sure that there's the proper flow downs, and then they will have to also flow those down to any of their subcontractors. You, as being in whatever industry you're on, you may have signed up and have certain client agreements of your own. Say, hey, that we're going to have certain either SLAs or response times. So when you're developing your questionnaires, make sure that you take in consideration those requirements from your own client base or your service offerings that you have out there. I mentioned before, you want good alignment with your information security, not only policies, but the program as a whole. They get good continuity and harmonization there will allow your questions to be relevant to the security team that you're trying to protect as an organization. Certainly, there's not always a one-size-fits-all. We talked about a 4-tiered system previously. There's different questionnaires that make sense for different types of third parties. Those that are bringing you coffee may not need the full SIG review to go through, but maybe others, you do need a more in-depth evaluation of them. So certainly things to consider, access control data types. We talked a little bit about that incident response. You definitely want to make sure there's tight timelines there for reporting and clear instruction on how to report those. As anyone that's in the space, vulnerability management takes on 2 points. One is patch management, making sure you're proactively addressing the vulnerabilities that are out there. And then also you're doing that vulnerability management from vulnerability scanning, doing your quarterly scans or your penetration tests. Make sure that there's an expectation that they're addressing those, especially with those higher CVSS scores, within agreed upon timeframes, especially if they're hosting content for your website or your business function. There should be an expectation that you can see the results of those tests and verify that they're being done. Certainly, if their data is moving onto the endpoints, that you have proper endpoint controls on them. The hard drives should be encrypted at rest to protect the data, antivirus programs, and so forth. but also that they pass, all these requirements are being passed down to their third parties, your fourth parties as an organization. So certainly things to think about as you're developing your questionnaires for your program. Next, you've got a questionnaire, you give it to that questionnaire to the third party, they fill out the questionnaire, and at the end of it, you're gonna grade them. They passed, they kind of passed, maybe they didn't pass, or they completely bombed it. You have to come up with some sort of model. I don't know if it's a metric driven, that's how we typically work with our clients, is understanding, did they miss severely? So what's the residual risk or the inherent risk and residual risk of this evaluation that you're seeing with them? And so when you're looking at those rating models, say, okay, what do we accept as an organization at those various tiers that we talked about for conducting business? And so you've got your inherent risk, what kind of answers and issues do they have based upon the information you're sharing with them, and you get your residual risk based upon the controls they have in place to protect that. So it's certainly good to have not only that assessment, but a remediation process in place. So if they're missing certain things, guess what? There's that one, I don't know, VP that says, hey, we're going to use this third party no matter what, because I already did a side deal with them. They're getting us the best possible rate for this activity. It's in our best strategic alignment to get this out the door fast, and they're the ones to go with. Well, guess what? You have to have some sort of exception process in place so that you can get those approvals, especially when those third parties are at a lower rating model after your evaluation. So you have conditional or maybe provisional approvals that, yes, we'll approve you for the next quarter, 6 months, but you need to meet certain gates. So I really stress to our clients, it's not only the act of doing an assessment and getting a grade, it's getting that grade, and for those that aren't meeting the mark, what's the remediation management that goes with it? So there has to be follow-up with those that aren't quite there to either get them to where they need to be, set your expectations with your vendors and third parties so you can get alignment back to what your security posture, what your security program dictates. So understand what that reassessment process is. And yeah, absolutely. So you've gone out there, you've done your initial assessment, they're off and working. Security is not one of those things you set it and forget it. You come back in here, maybe because they're a tier 1, you're going to go after every year, you're going to do a reassessment. Maybe for a tier 2, it's a longer frequency, 18 months, 2 years. I don't know what makes sense, but what is the reassessment criteria and frequency, and how do you know if that vendor's all of a sudden changing the type of services that they're providing you? So certainly things to look at as part of not only the assessment, but also remediation management. Solution categories. There are lots of great solutions out there. What is the right solution for you? It depends. So here's a couple of considerations I like to talk about before we get into what the solution is. Let's talk about some of the considerations. How does it integrate with your own existing technology? Your business partners are very used to using some sort of ticketing system or workflow module. Then does it integrate with that workflow and ticketing system? If it does, great. If it doesn't, then that might be a deciding criteria. Integration is an important part of the decision-making process. Native API interfaces. That's, again, helping with that integration. Where does it interface with? How can you make it so that as new vendors come into a contracts management system, that they automatically get routed into for vendor assessment? Your stakeholders, we talked about your business stakeholders, those that are asking for this new vendor. If all of a sudden you give them another new tool that they have to use and fill out, there's a training piece that has to go with that. You have to socialize that they're now going to change their process for submitting maybe a new vendor request. So is that integrated with your current single sign-on solution? So there's definitely, you're now adding new software for a business that a business may need to integrate with. So understand what their familiarity is and is a good user experience. The next one I'd like to talk about is realistic expectations for license usage. It is all too often that part of the process, how many vendors do you have? Oh, we've got 10,000 vendors. All right, well, we're gonna need to buy a 10,000 license a pack. Well, depending upon the particular tool, then there's different kinds of tools, and we'll talk about ratings tools and process management tools, and but you want to make sure you're buying the right size package for what you can realistically expect to use for the particular program. All too often you'll hear, oh yeah, we signed up for 400 licenses, but 6 months into the program, we've used 60 of them. And unfortunately, and we have a lot of great vendors and partners on the in this space. We just want to make sure they're getting the right kind of license usage and model to put out there. So at the end of the day, the big takeaway from this one is the tools should support the business process, not define the process. Yes, they all have their own workflows and they can help make those workflows better, but they're there to support business, make life easier, not make it more complicated. What are some tool categories that we want to look at, or some of the tool categories in the third-party vendor space? You certainly have your rating tools out there. You've got your bid sites, your security scorecards. You've got your process management, your prevalence. You've got process unities and others out there. You've got in your exchanges. You've got your let's see, we've got our Cyber GRX. You've got OneTrust. So each of these tools, so the ratings tools there, they do exactly that. They put a rating out there. I get a score of 500, 400, or I get an A or an F or whatever it happens to be. So they give you some good information, and that is good enrichment information. But usually those rating systems do just that. Now, some of them are expanding their scope, and that's why this Venn diagram kind of depicts how those product solutions have started to go into other space. But others around process management. Hey, I want to facilitate a questionnaire process. I want to facilitate the reporting that goes with it. So that's certainly a good, important set of tools to look at. And then there's those solutions are actually formal exchanges. They conduct the assessments for you and push back the results of it within the environment. So when you're looking at tools, make sure that you understand which of these categories do the tools fall in, and how is that helping my overall program? All too often I see, oh, well, we bought this should do everything. Not all tools do everything. You have to put your own process design behind it to make sure it works with the roles and responsibilities that you have. So think through that with your tool categories as you're making those investments, and we can help you through that process. So common challenges. I want to take a few minutes here and talk about the common challenges we see and some solutions there. So first one here, large cloud service provider. They're not going to, you can send them all the questionnaires you want, unless they're competing for, I don't know, the big Jedi project or whatever the multi-billion-dollar project that I think Azure and Amazon are fighting against. But they're not going to complete questionnaires. But you can use alternative evidence. I like to poke fun and give kudos to AWS. They've got a great artifact service. They've got all their stuff listed out there, their current certifications, roles, and responsibilities, what's the client responsibility, what do they handle for you. So yeah, look for alternative evidence is certainly a strategy there. Executives want to bypass the review process. Man, is that true? I tell you, there's someone that has to get something done and get it done quick. And say, oh, I don't have time for that, just make it happen. At the beginning of when you're developing your program, you certainly want to establish escalation processes. So, hey, if I'm going to go out of bounds, I'm going to do this a little bit differently. I want to make sure that my exceptions are defined up front. And so a VP should absolutely be able to make strategic decisions, and sometimes at the expense of security. But there should be a process that documents that risk, and that risk document should say, or the exception should be, okay, for the next 3 months, we're going to go on board, but then we're going to follow up with a formal assessment, or 6 months, we're going to do something. There should be a process in place, and taking the time to go through what an exception process looks like up front will save a lot of fight and headaches on the back end. I promise you that. The vendor doesn't meet all the expected requirements. That's true. You've got certain expectations and it's misaligned. So, define your thresholds. Where is your thresholds for those different tiers, the type of information they're going to have access to? If there's a hard push to do it, and you can come up with a model that maybe you can do a conditional approval. Say, hey, you're so close. There's this one thing that you're just misaligned on. Let's go ahead and put a remediation plan. Let's do, if they're committed to making those fixes, hey, put it part of the contract. Say, hey, by this date, you're going to get this additional, so you can do a change order and update the contracts there to meet the expected needs. Vendors not responsive to inquiries, certainly go back to that business stakeholder. Hey, they're the ones that they're trying to get the business. So, leverage them as a conduit to answer those questions. Boy, vendor does not use the same terminology. Boy, we come across that a lot. We do a lot of these assessments on our clients' behalf, and it's like, oh, can you talk to us about this? Yeah, I don't know. Let's use one. Oh, your firewall. Oh, we've got antivirus installed on the computer. Okay, I guess that's okay. Maybe a firewall at the computer level. What about your network? So it's just a lot of times, unfortunately, and especially when we're dealing with smaller vendors, they don't understand the terminology, whether or not they're answering the questionnaires or the evidence that they're providing to support the claims in their questionnaires just doesn't make sense. Unfortunately, there's going to be times where you have to get on the call with them. But if you can explain and show some examples, examples really go a long way of explaining to them to help you get that alignment with terminology. Single employee companies or small companies, boy, I don't have an information security policy. It's just me and my laptop. I don't have a firewall. I don't have this. So, those small companies really do present some challenges sometimes, and maybe you have to treat them differently. There's a different set of expectations for them. Maybe you treat them as contractors. Maybe you let them use your own infrastructure and technology. If they don't have the type of security controls in place, hey, maybe you guys provide and manage the PC that's being leveraged for that particular service offering. I don't know, it depends on what the needs are, but yeah, you could provide that control as an extension of your company where you have all the proper safeguards in place. Maybe you're extending it to their virtual desktop environment or Citrix or other solution. Vendor business owner response. Oh yeah, this is, so you asked that when we say business owner, again, business owner here is not the owner of a business. The business owner here is the one who owns the relationship with that third party. So you say, oh yeah, I need to get this third party because they're going to manage this process. All they need from me is just a couple design requirements. Okay, great. So when we ask the vendor, hey, so what do you really need? Oh, we need the database, we need the social security numbers, we need the credit card information. When there's a disconnect between what the business thinks the vendor needs and what the vendor says they need, it's like, okay, obviously there's a disconnect, and that could change the tiering of that particular third party. So those are good opportunities to hit the pause button, have a follow-up conversation with the vendor and the business owner together to say, okay, why is there a misalignment? How do we get to an alignment? And how do we put that vendor back through the proper third-party review program process? So there's certainly a lot more challenges out there, but these are a couple that I thought I would share today. So what's our approach? So I got just 2 slides here, and then we'll wrap it up into questions. The first one is we help our customers build out a program, or in many cases, rebuild the program. You've heard me talk a lot today about some key components, some foundational elements of building a third-party vendor assessment program. We help them do that. We create the security questionnaires, the communication templates, the runbooks, and ultimately help to get the right kind of tool guidance out there. A lot of great partners, a lot of great solutions out there, but we want to make sure we're getting you the right kind of solution and the right kind of implementation for that solution. So build the program. 2 is operate. Once you have it, deploy the technology, someone has to operate that. There's certainly the making sure that those are getting the right questionnaires sent to them. When questionnaires are coming back and the responses don't look good, getting on those phone calls. In some cases, we've got some for financial services, they'll actually ship us and we'll fly places. We've been out to Serbia and India. This year we had to do those remotely for doing in-depth, detailed assessment reviews, where others it's a half-an-hour phone conversation. So it really spans the spectrum of possibilities, but it really needs to align with what the expectations and needs are of the organization. So we'll come up with our summary reports, KPIs, but probably the most important one, not only is the vendor assessments, but the opportunity to do program optimization. So we come back there, we help them tune up their SOPs to get the program even more efficient, so that eventually we can go ahead and turn that program back over to them. A lot of customers come to us saying, hey, help us operate so we can clear the backlog of vendors. We've got a lot, we need you to help us burn through those. Once you get into a steady state, it gets a little bit more manageable, and sometimes the customers want to take that on themselves. So what does a model look like? Certainly, it takes a little time, a couple months maybe, to build out the right program. We can help co-operate that with them. And then ultimately, at some point in time, it maybe makes sense to go ahead and transition that program back on to the vendor once they've cleared the backlog. What are some of the keys to success? certainly, probably communication is the first one, but executive sponsorship, understanding that you need clear project management throughout the entire process. But you have to have some of these foundational activities in place before. If you don't have well-established your own information security policies and standards and expectations for third parties, you got to get those up front. If you don't have, or you've got weekly defined vendor security exhibits or equivalents from the contracting process, then you definitely want to set expectations early on. So that may take some legal review. And then certainly when you're deploying stuff, you've got new platform integrations that you have to go through. So those are things that will certainly affect how long or how much effort these programs take. Certainly the number of vendors that you need to evaluate will certainly dictate how much effort this takes. And then at the end of the day, when you're defining these programs, it can say, we can create the best process in the world, but if there's not engagement from that vendor or third party to be responsive, to complete the questionnaires, to use the platform, to use the portal, to do anything, you can't fix that. Well, you can by getting rid of that vendor, but one of the things when we try to help define metrics, okay, what's the minimum amount of time we could potentially get through this process? And it's with the vendor engagements, the wild card, how much time do you want to give them before you nag them, before you don't want to piss off your partners, but if you at some point, how do you get engagement? So certainly things to consider. So hopefully this was a good set of highlights and covered some good ground here. I'm going to open it up at this point. If you have any questions, please put them into the chat window. I know that Kevin's monitoring that. So I guess Kevin, flipping over, do we have any questions at this time?
Yeah, thanks, Jeremiah. That was very informative. From what I can see, we have 3 questions right now. Everyone, please feel free to ask any questions that you have top of mind while we have Jeremiah on the line. He can address them here and now. Otherwise, we're happy to establish a one-on-one session with Jeremiah to discuss third-party vendor risk, if that makes sense. But for now, here are the questions. Jeremiah, the first one I can handle. Will we be able to get a copy of the slides? And the answer to that is yes. Your Tevora rep will be in touch over the coming days and will be positioned to provide access to both the webinar deck, which is obviously the slides in a PDF format, as well as the recording. And then the next question for you, Jeremiah, what do you see as a ratio of staff to do third-party assessments versus a number of vendors a company assesses on an annual basis?
Kevin, can you repeat that one more time and make sure I digested that whole thing properly there? There was a lot to unpack.
Yeah, not a problem. What do you see as a ratio of staff to do third-party assessments versus a number of vendors a company would assess on an annual basis?
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, the great question. Yeah, people are trying to build their programs, they're trying to get budget for their programs. And so, that correlation is certainly important. Hopefully I don't upset the person with having a vague answer here, but I'm going to give you, and if you have a follow-up question, please reach out to Kevin. We'll get some specifics for your environment, but it really depends. So like I mentioned before, some of these assessments can be an on-site evaluation and take several days because it's a critically important organization to a financial services company. And some of these other ones where they are a lower tier, maybe completing the questionnaire and having a half-an-hour phone conversation. So with that understanding in mind, there's, I hate to give a specific ratio, but yeah, there's the staff needed to conduct this based upon the number of vendors. You see teams of armies of one sometimes, and then you see, as you get more and more enterprise, when you start hitting the $1 billion revenue size organizations, you tend to see a bigger programs around this. So I'm gonna decline to give a specific answer, but I will say reach out to Kevin or your local rep. Happy to dive into what kind of makes sense, and if you're trying to do a budgetary quote, we definitely can help with that. So good, very good question. That's a great question. Thank you.
Great. We had another new question that just came in as well. How can we manage shadow IT and products overlap through third-party management program?
Read that one more time. I have to unpack that one.
Yeah, it's okay. Yeah, it's a good one. How can we manage shadow IT and product overlap through a third-party management program?
Great question. Yeah, so this is what I actually almost had a bullet point on product overlap. It's amazing. So you go into an organization and when you're part of the third-party review program, you say, oh, this company does this. They have a very specific function. Oh, neat. And then a couple of weeks later, you're like, oh, this third party does this. Didn't we just assess a company that does the exact same thing? So it's amazing. You think through the procurement process, they'd have a way to do to deal with that overlapping product or solution sets. So it's closely defining what the business needs are, and we've done this for organizations. We write a synopsis of what they do, and we've even called it out and said, hey, you may want to go back to procurement and just make sure there's a need for both these. Our job, our lens for this job is really around the information security posture for these third parties. That being said, you do get other insights that are oftentimes interesting. So we make side remarks to them. I don't want to get into why one division's using one particular vendor where another division's using a completely separate vendor to do almost the same thing. That really turns into procurement management and making sure that you're getting the best deals from your vendors by bundling where it makes the most sense. But certainly when you see those situations come up, having those conversations with the procurement team is something that we certainly do, and something that certainly you get that extra set of visibility, because security is highly important, whereas sometimes maybe business optimization with procurement's not as much. When you start talking about shadow IT, we talked a little bit about, I guess if you're using third parties for it, then there's in-house shadow IT and outsourced shadow IT. So if it's outsourced shadow IT, is what we're really coming into from a third-party perspective, is really looking at visibility into who you pay, who those contracts are written with. I don't know how many external IT people are going to be doing stuff for free, but making sure that you get visibility into that, having those surveys, and figuring out where to consolidate there certainly makes sense. But yeah, definitely there's a strong integration between information security and procurement. They are a key stakeholder, as I've mentioned earlier. So great question. Fantastic. Any others that have popped in here?
Yeah, I can see another one here. How long does a typical third-party vendor risk assessment take, soup to nuts?
Okay. So that depends as well. So I mentioned like some of those they'll take so soup to nuts. So there's effort and then there's duration. So let's break it down that way. So it may only take the vendor completing a questionnaire, may only take them, let's say, an hour or two, maybe they have a very robust security program, and then you're reviewing it, it only takes maybe a half an hour, or it's an automated system, so it automatically grades it. And so that time is almost instantaneous, but the time that you're having to wait is the time for the third party to complete that questionnaire. When we build out timeline models for questionnaire reviews, we try to work with each client in the tiering process to make sure that we understand, we expect on average that this tier vendor is going to, on average, we're going to get 21 days or less to complete that review process. So it could take up to 21 days from the time the business puts the security questionnaire in there, that profiles it. It triggers a process. It tells the point of contact at the end vendor to complete the questionnaire. Maybe they don't have all the answers, so they have to go to their security team and collect a bunch of answers or create accounts on the platform for them to fill out the questionnaire. So that could take 1 to 2 weeks there. And then the evaluation time, are there any gaps and remediation items that need to be worked through? So these things can take 3 weeks. Is not an outlandishly long timeline for it. From an effort perspective, that's where the tools and automation come into play. They really help reduce the amount of time or effort that the teams are putting out there, because you've built that into the program. So hopefully that answered the question for that individual. If there's a follow-up needed, I'm happy to have a follow-up conversation. So any other questions there before I start to wrap this up?
No, that looks like it's about it. But obviously, if anything else comes in, your reps will have the access to the questions. So Jeremiah will make himself available, just to reemphasize that. And that's it on my end. But Jeremiah, anything else that you have in order to wrap this up, please go right ahead.
Thank you very much for taking the time out of your very busy days to listen to us. We do a lot of these upcoming events. Check our website for the particular details. Somehow you found your way to our event today. we'll have many more of these. I think we've probably had 15 or 20 of these this year so far. So lots of opportunities to hear more, learn more. We're here. So at the end of the day, we've got your back. So